Hezekiah was a great king with many significant accomplishments. But one that we have not mentioned yet comes through in the text right here, and it is the engineering marvel of Hezekiah's tunnel. So, Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, has come and invaded the territory of Judah, and he is turning his attention now on Jerusalem. In verse 4, we read that Hezekiah gathered a large group of people who blocked all the springs and the stream that flowed through the land. Why should the kings of Assyria come and find plenty of water? They said. So the Bible tells us Hezekiah made a tunnel and a pool, and he rediverted the water so that it would not flow outside of the city walls. This tunnel exists to this very day. You can go to Jerusalem. You can walk through this tunnel. It is an absolute engineering marvel. The tunnel stretches for 533 meters. It is carved through solid rock. And most impressively of all, because time was so short, as we've read, and they wanted to get this tunnel in place to protect their water supply before the Assyrians arrived in Jerusalem, they decided to start digging from both ends. Obviously, only so many people can be at the front of the tunnel actively carving away, but if you go from both ends, you can have two separate teams working on constructing this tunnel at the same time. The problem is that any inaccuracy in either team will mean that the tunnels will just miss each other entirely. However, in Hezekiah's case, the two teams operated with remarkable precision. And at the point where they met each other, there is an inscription on the wall telling the story of the great joy that they experienced when each team heard the pickaxes of the other and could hear the shouts of the other team's voices. Unbelievably clever, and a feat of engineering and craftsmanship which has stood the test of time, more than 2,500 years, and it remains to this very day. Clearly, Hezekiah is a man of great faith, but his life is the living embodiment of faith that works. James in the New Testament insists that faith without works is dead, and Hezekiah would give a hearty amen to that sentiment. Clearly, he calls the people to put their faith in God, but at the same time, he masterminds this engineering project. He also repairs and restores broken sections of the wall. He builds towers upon it so that they can fire down upon the Assyrians. We read that he built another wall outside the first one. He reinforced the terraces of the city of David. He also made large numbers of weapons and shields. Yes, he's prayerful, but he's also practical. And he's a great example to us. Now, we know what happened to the Assyrian army because we read about it in 2 Kings, and we'll read it again when we get to the book of Isaiah. Essentially, the Assyrian army, they set up camp outside Jerusalem. They threaten the people. They blaspheme God. They say that the God of Jerusalem is just like the gods of the other peoples of the world, the work of human hands. But we read verse 20, King Hezekiah and the prophet Isaiah, son of Amos, cried out in prayer to heaven about this. And the Lord sent an angel who annihilated all the fighting men and the commanders and the officers in the camp of the Assyrian king. So he withdrew to his own land in disgrace. And when he went to the temple of his own God, some of his sons, his own flesh and blood, cut him down with the sword. This is one of the most remarkable deliverances found anywhere in the Bible. What an action-packed chapter this is. And in fact, it's not over just yet. The final little section here details for us that Hezekiah was a great leader and a godly man. He was also imperfect. And we should expect to see signs of that imperfection in his life. There were instances of pride, but like a true believer, verse 26, he repented of the pride that was in his heart, which is an encouragement to the rest of us, isn't it? We're told just a little bit about his failure with the Babylonian envoy, which we read about again in Kings. And there are just a few hints there that with all the remarkable success Hezekiah saw, pride did become a bit of a problem for him. Still, Hezekiah is rightly remembered as one of the very greatest kings God's people ever knew. He rested with his ancestors and was buried on the hill where the tombs of David's descendants are. All Judah and the people of Jerusalem honored him when he died, and Manasseh his son succeeded him as king. There are some things that God does with us and through us. There are some things that God does totally without us. There are examples of both in this chapter. God has given us work to do, like obeying him wholeheartedly, sharing the gospel courageously. He's commanded us to do these things, but we cannot do these things without his help. So these are in the category of things that God does through us and with us. The tunnel project, for example, in the chapter, was something that God accomplished through Hezekiah. But the great deliverance here was not something that God did through Hezekiah, but completely aside from his efforts. The angel of the Lord came and struck down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. Hezekiah didn't do that. It wasn't his strength or his skill or even his soldiers who did work there. It was the pure power of God working for the good of his people, which is why we ought to be prayerful and practical with the work that we are called to do. Some things he will accomplish with us and through us, but the greatest things, like salvation, he accomplishes entirely without us. But in either case, we are delighted to see God at work.